Okay, we are in chapter 4 of the book of Daniel. Um, as we've been working our way through chapter by chapter, pretty much verse by verse. Last week we took on two different chapters that are at different points in the life and the story of Daniel. Remember, the chapter 1 through 6 is a historical account of Daniel, and chapter 7 through 12 that wraps out the book are really just visions and not even necessarily in chronological order, but it's outside of the historical narrative. And so a lot of people, it's led to a lot of conjecture that potentially two authors in the latter half of Daniel, and I think we've done a sufficient job of putting that to rest, if for no other reason than Christ himself quotes from Daniel in both the first and the second half, and in each case attributes it to Daniel, and in each case calls him the prophet Daniel. And so all arguments that this is either not prophetic or not written by Daniel go out the wayside. And so we are coming to the end of the historical portion of it, the narrative portion. And as I said, last week took the two probably most familiar stories in the fiery furnace and the lion's den, and really looked at those with an eye towards why did we never realize they're the exact same story? Why did we never realize that the Holy Spirit is telling the exact tale twice? And not only that, why is he telling stories to begin with in a book of prophecy? All of those are really outside the normal for what we see in a prophetic book, and they should lead us to say, what's going on here? What's the message? Why do we have near identical tales, and why do we have them in this sequence? And I think if you go through the exercise that we've been going through and just say, I'm putting Christ in the middle of it, in what way does this speak to him? What does this tell me about either his mission, his first coming, his second coming, his role as our Redeemer, various attributes of him? What do we learn there? And so we go through that, and you get a very unique perspective of those two stories that most of us have heard since you were in Sunday school doing felt board diagrams, and yet I think you go through your whole life never really even thinking, what does that mean? Like, what's the message there? They become so familiar that you lose the message. And I think there's a danger in that throughout the book of Daniel, because it's so readable. It's such a good story. It's so incredible to just read through, and you walk away with just, wow, God's awesome. And if that's all you took away from it, probably still worth your read. If what you took away was, wow, praise the Lord, he's done miraculous things, it was probably worth your time. I am certain, and I believe the text reveals that there's far more to it. And as we get into tonight's study, chapter 4 is the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar. Maybe not as well known as some of the other stories in Daniel, but this is the longest chapter in the entire book of Daniel. And it's distinct in that it happens to be the only chapter of the Bible that is written by a Gentile non-believer and a king of Babylon at that. And he specifically attributes throughout, so that we don't get this misinterpretation that Daniel's writing from the perspective of the king. It's written in the first person narrative, and it is from the point of view of King Nebuchadnezzar, and he very clearly tells us this declaration was published throughout the known world. And so it's unique. It's got a prophetic aspect to it, but at the same time, it might also be the easiest chapter for a exegetical study like we do verse by verse, because it gives a prophecy, and then Daniel very specifically goes line by line in that prophecy and explains what each aspect of it means. So there's very little in terms of speculation on the meaning of the dream, but just like with Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it's very similar to the first dream of Nebuchadnezzar that we learned about, where he sees in his dream a statue, and he first tests his advisors to see if any of them can tell him the dream. None can. There's a death sentence looming over them. And then Daniel and his three friends come forward and both interpret the dream, and they tell Nebuchadnezzar that he saw a statue with a head of gold, a chest, a body of bronze, or a body of silver, a stomach of bronze, and legs of iron, and iron and clay. And Daniel goes through and gives the interpretation that this is what each of those are. You are the head of gold. The next will be a subsequent kingdom. The next will be, there's a prophetic aspect to it that Daniel doesn't get to see fulfilled. And yet now looking back, we can easily see how incredibly specific that was. This prophecy also has something of a dual aspect to it. And I think it's interesting to review. I'm not nearly as ironclad on it as I am on the fiery furnace and the lion's den, that they are perfect parallels, and I don't believe that the Holy Spirit just puts stories in that are for our edification. I think there really is a purpose and a message, and all of it points to Christ, and I believe that because Christ told me that's the case. And so if I don't find him in the text, it's my insufficiency. I don't have the intellect or spiritual insight to find it. It's not that it's not there. And so that's why studying the Bible is just a lifetime pursuit and just a constant, it's an adventure. You're always learning new things. No matter how many times you go through it, you find new things. And this was one where just going through it this time, I'd never really, not never, but I hadn't given it a full in-depth review, and it was just interesting to look at it with fresh eyes and see a fresh perspective. But it'll be a fairly straightforward study this week, and I think it's very much fits the theme that we've been going through, that there is a meaning to this, and then there's a secondary meaning when you put Christ in the middle of it, and I believe that is the real heart of the entire message system. So just to orient ourselves, this is what we've been through in chapter 1 through 6, and here we are in chapter 4. As we mentioned previously, chapters 2 through 7 are all written in Aramaic, which was the language of the times. Very similar to Hebrew, and we're going to have an example of that today. It's the same style as Hebrew in that there are no vowels. It's contracted into just consonants, and it'd be difficult to distinguish those without a trained eye. Aramaic and Hebrew look in writing very similar, are spoken very similar, both of the same dialect, but different languages. So there are some difficulties in translation, obviously. In terms of the life and the timeline of Daniel, we are now, we started with the captivity, chapter 1. Chapter 2 takes us into the dream which brought Daniel and his friends to the king's notice, and this was early on in King Nebuchadnezzar's reign, very early on in Daniel's life. He was probably around 15 or 16. At this point, we're fast-forwarding probably 25 or 30 years, if most the best guess, most scholars, towards the end of Nebuchadnezzar's life. We know that he died in 562, so we've got a very end on when this could be. The latest it could be 562, and we know that this was a short time before his death, so we're somewhere near 562 at this point, and Daniel is probably in his 40s or middle of his career. If you think that he rose to power and became second in command when he was 16 or 17, by now, if he's still an administrator of the king, you have to imagine he's only grown in significance. And I think that starts to explain why you don't see him in the narrative in the story of the fiery furnace. He's taken on something of he was either there and chose to bow and was acquiesced to the king's demands, which we know Daniel is. You think that's highly unlikely, or he's off doing something in service of the king, and there are definitely indications in the text that would support that. But the Hebrew Talmud, the traditions behind the Bible state that he became a foreign administrator of one of the provinces that was near Egypt. So to southwest of Jerusalem and far southwest of Babylon, that he was placed in some sort of administrative capacity. And we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar confirm that he holds a title of that's high in the state, but it would explain a lot of why we don't see him in the narrative. And in this case, there's another indicator, but we'll get a lot more of it when we get into his visions, that he appears to kind of be abroad. He kind of is some sort of a diplomat at best. He's not always at home. But he does seem to have developed this kind of personal relationship with Nebuchadnezzar, and the language that comes out in this chapter 4 is really cool. The way you see the interaction with Nebuchadnezzar, and the Talmud also would say that Daniel became near friends and was a close advisor. And during this period of madness that's described in chapter 4, the Talmud says that Daniel was the one that convalesced with him, that he nursed him through it, and he was there by his side, and so that it seems to be supported by the text. So just by way of review, Nebuchadnezzar gets a really he gets the short stick for sure in the Bible. He's portrayed as kind of a madman. Like you just see him, the only time he speaks until chapter 4 is to make threats of burning people alive, demanding worship, I'll kill you, your children, and everyone else, and make your house a dung heap. I think he says that like 3 different times. And it just portrays him as sort of a madman. To be fair, he somewhat was. He was probably the most absolute dictator the world's ever known. Every government since developed some sort of parliamentary or checks and balance system almost because of him, because Babylon became so strong under Nebuchadnezzar that the subsequent generations, it just weakened and weakened and weakened after evil Merodach takes over, his son, and then Neriglazer, and then Nabonidus, and finally Belshazzar. Each one subsequently, there's murders and intrigue, but the reason Babylon weakened was because it was an absolute dictatorship that was led by an incredible ruler at first. Nebuchadnezzar's father was Nabopolassar, and he was a warlord, but he was at the same time kind of a peacemaker. Each country that he would conquer, he would take the best and brightest of that culture, and he would preserve culture and use it to further Babylon. So that's where you get this practice of taking the smartest of them and bringing them to court. And he was known for kind of creating this mixing, or what we would call it a melting pot of different cultures, and all the best things from every culture that came to Babylon, and yet he would leave the nations that he conquered standing and allow them some autonomy to operate. And we see that with Jerusalem, or with the southern kingdom of Judea as well. He allowed them to remain as a vassal state, but again and again and again, the king was convinced to rebel against them, and 3 times Nebuchadnezzar has to come back and lay siege until finally he just sees that as long as there's a Jew in Israel, they can't be governed, and wipes out the whole thing. And that's the destruction of the nation. Good.
When all the kids were gathered who seemed bright and handsome and everything, were they, as captives, were they slaves, considered slaves? And was Daniel considered a slave his whole time in Babylon?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's still considered a slave. I think, he's elevated to a high position, but they were still lesser citizens. They were still like foreign. It'll refer throughout the text as being of the Chaldeans, and that's a higher order, that someone was a Chaldean, and that's like saying an American to us, but these were foreigners. And so each time you see one of these Jewish young men elevated to a position of authority, it always talks about, but the Chaldeans did this. And it's like the locals, the people that were part of that society, they were still seen as outcasts, and it still classifies them as slaves. Certainly when they were taken captive, they were hostages. That Jehoiakim was put in place after the first rebellion, and his son, Jehoiachin, was taken captive along with members of the house of the royal line, and that's where Daniel was taken, and there were close to 3,000 of them taken, and they were considered hostages for good performance. But for some unexplained reason, when the subsequent kings rebelled, they didn't wipe them out. They continued. But based on Josephus' writing, it may be that only 3 or 4 survived of that class. It may be that the program that we learned about, where they were brought up and they competed against each other to see who would serve at court, and that Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and Daniel were all picked as the best of them. That training program, Josephus seemed to indicate, when you failed, you were killed. Like if you were weeded out, you were killed. And so that's nowhere in the biblical text, but that's kind of the indication that they were what's left of that breed. So certainly I would classify that as slaves if they were able to just be put to death when they weren't useful. So really all of it just kind of goes to, it's a very draconian reign, but he was also probably the most prosperous of all the subsequent world empires, that he conquered and built something that would continue throughout every age we've known. You would not believe the influences of the Babylonian culture on everything you do today. You can trace some of the lineage to all of our holiday celebrations, to our economic system, to our system of astronomies and sciences, the advances in Babylonian culture. This is not a Neolithic society. They're not. They are very advanced in terms of their discoveries, and it's a lot to do with Nebuchadnezzar's melting pot concept. Is before that there was independent states that would develop expertise in metalwork. Right, one country would be known for their metalwork. You hear of the cedars of Lebanon. The woodwork in this region was renowned throughout, but the metallurgy and gold and in Israel was world renowned. And then the science and agriculture of the Greeks, when Nebuchadnezzar conquered, they pulled it all together. And then for the first time in human history, learn from each other, and you develop some of these sciences that are still around today. Like we kind of laugh at astrology, they're simpletons. It's not astrology in the way you think of it. It's not predicting what's going to happen to you in your life based on when you were born. They had a very sophisticated system of monitoring and measuring stars and astrological cycles and predicting weather phenomenon that's still used today. And so Babylon was very prolific, and there is no argument possible that most of the advances didn't come because of or under Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Everything that happened subsequent to him is a disaster, leading to the fall shortly after his death. And most of his father's reign is just spent in conquest. The reason you know Babylon outside of the Bible is because of Nebuchadnezzar. Very, very, very successful world dictator and an absolute authority. When we get to the Persian Empire, we'll see that in three different places, both in Esther and in Daniel, when we get a view of the king's authority, it's always subject to limitations. The king makes an edict, he signs something into law, but then has no ability to change it once it's been signed into law. In Esther, he decrees the death of all the Jews, and he says, now there's nothing I can do, so then he signs a subsequent decree that the Jews can now defend themselves, but he couldn't retract his own laws. And the same thing we see of in the lion's den scene, where over and over and over, according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which, as you know, cannot be changed, it's a weaker form of government. There's now a parliament in place. And each government that comes after that is slightly less centralized. So he's probably the most absolute dictator the world has ever known. And I'm going to forecast that next week we're going to get into what most people call the fall of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, Belteshazzar. It's the last story in the life of Daniel under the Babylonian Empire, and leads directly into the captivity by the Persians. And that is a really interesting study because you can find references to Babylon. There are over 300 references to Babylon in the Bible, more than any other city other than Jerusalem, and almost 10 times more than any other city other than Jerusalem. You can almost read the entire Bible as a tale of two cities. Babylon becomes both a representative figure of evil and greed and worldly dominion, and Jerusalem becomes a figure of the kingdom of God, of God's governance, of God's law. Sometimes it's used literally, and you have to kind of go through the text each time they're used. Wait, does this mean literal Jerusalem? Oh yeah, okay, it's talking about something that happened there that's probably literal. Or is it talking about Jerusalem as in like the city of God? Same thing with Babylon. Jerusalem means city of peace. Salem is shalom. It's city of peace. And then Babylon is we always think of the Tower of Babel, which Babel means confusion. It's actually Babel, and Babylon is the gateway of the gods. It literally means the gateway of the gods, which makes it very significant when you get into some of Revelation and the prophecies about the end times being centralized in Babylon. Well, does that mean it's centralized in the physical Babylon, or is it just a reference to the gateway of the gods or something? Okay.
Is Revelation the only place in which the term Mystery Babylon shows up?
It is, yep. And Mystery Babylon becomes something about Babylon. You'll see Mystery Babylon used over and over. There's something about Babylon that was that's the idea of mystery in the Bible. It's something that was revealed before but not explained, right? It's not mystery like we think of it, like there is no answer. This Greek concept of mysterion is something heretofore described and now explained. The mystery of the church we saw last week. The mystery of Israel is something that was alluded to and now has been explained. It's almost a prophecy and fulfillment situation. So when you see Mystery Babylon, it's an illusion that something was taught before, and here is how it culminates. And we'll talk about that a little bit next week too. So that's the life of Nebuchadnezzar, and I think it's important to put him in a framework, because we tend to just have this mental picture of him. It's very Sunday school that he's just kind of a madman. He does seem to be flighty. He goes from worshiping, wanting to put someone to death for not worshiping him, to falling at the feet of Daniel to worship him when he revealed a dream. And we think of that as, oh, how bizarre. But you have to remember the culture they're in. These cultures had many, many gods, like a pantheon of gods, and each one had their own personal gods, had their family gods, and it was just a normal practice. They very much just gave in to this urge to worship. And so to fall at someone's feet and worship is not like we think of it, right? They're doing it flighty. They're just like, well, I want good weather today. I might as well worship at the feet of the sun god today. And it means less than nothing to them. To us, it's like, oh, the idolatry, right? But their entire life and their entire ritualistic system is around worshiping a different god for any given outcome. I got to go to war today. I would visit the temple of this and worship at that. It's trying to please different gods to achieve different outcomes, but they're tools. They're all resources to better you and to better whatever's around you. It wasn't true service in the way we think of a god and being even religious. It's more outcome driven, if that makes sense, right? That theme is so consistent from most of ancient pagan cultures. The idea of a pantheon, that's the reason you have to develop so many gods, is because you got to have someone to worship for any outcome you want and someone to blame when it doesn't happen. It's just the will of the gods. Right? It allows you to say, it's not really my fault. That's just the will of the gods, right? If there's a god of the harvest, well, it wasn't because I did a poor job sowing the seeds this year. It's just, God of the harvest. It's really the same concept we see of self-denial and not being able to take accountability. But that's a whole other tyrant.
But did you say he was non-believer? Did you call him a non-believer?
He was, yes. He's a pagan king. He was non-Jew.
But he declared, like after the fiery furnace, that their God was God. And he went to Daniel and said...
Yep, and then in the next chapter, he says, you will worship no one else but my statue, and anyone else who worships. He may have acknowledged in the second chapter that Daniel's God was powerful and said, surely your God is the most high God. But then we see him within 5 years passing an edict that says, you'll worship no one else but this graven image that I prepare, right? And so he's still in that system. I do believe by the time we get to the end of chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar is a believer. I believe we will see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. I think the declaration he puts out to the world is a once and for all, and I think Daniel's subsequent testimony of him after that in chapter 5, he has, something tells me Nebuchadnezzar gets it at this point when he didn't get it before.
Yeah, because he said the Most High God. He didn't say the only God.
The only God. Right, exactly. Yep. And he always, he always said things it was always in the past sense, like Nebuchadnezzar did this thing. It isn't Nebuchadnezzar began to do this thing, right? He didn't adopt a thing. He didn't adopt the worship of God. And yet we're going to see at the end of this one, he says, I praise him. I will worship him, and it sort of seems to be the tense of it changes and becomes personal. Yeah.
Now, chapter 5, verse 21, when Daniel is speaking to
Yep.
Belshazzar.
Your father there was a king. Yep.
Till
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed over it whomsoever he will, but that Belshazzar was not humbling himself as his father had.
Exactly. And Daniel's referring to this exact incident with that's not a reference to the prior ones. He's referring to what's about to happen to Nebuchadnezzar here, and that'll be the result of this. But I think Daniel is testifying that he humbled himself. He's not talking about a one-time occurrence. I think it was a lifestyle. I think it was a change of life. So it makes this testimony of Nebuchadnezzar all the more interesting. So quite a bit of reading here, but it's straightforward. And so there's some keys to point out, but really the thing to take in is this is the heart of the king being revealed as a result of what God did, and it's both a narrative telling the dream and its fulfillment, but more importantly, it's his testimony. I mean, it's if you were to stand up and give your testimony in front of a church, this is about the equivalent for the ruler of the known world at this time to talk about his conversion story. If you look at it that way, it kind of has a little more power. So it started, Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all peoples, nations, languages that dwell in the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I think that's interesting. Just right off the bat, do you remember last week we skipped ahead to chapter 6 when Darius makes a decree? What does he start with? Shalom. Now all of a sudden every king that Daniel's with is using Jewish sayings, Jewish greetings. I think that's awesome. He starts off his message to the known world with shalom. He sounds just like Paul. I thought it good. Not Daniel told me I should. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. The things he did for me. How great are his signs. How mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore I used a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. So in this case, this adds to my conviction that the last time he did this, it was a test to see if they actually were worth anything. Because last time he doesn't give them the dream, he says, tell me the dream, and then tell me the interpretation. I believe he was saying, do you have any skill whatsoever? Is there anything to this? Whatever your divination, because these were all people that came in from his father. They were all part of his father's program. He's newly appointed. I think that was a test. This time he's done with the test. He's actually afraid. I'm not playing games anymore. I'm not trying to discern whether you have any talent or skill. He goes straight to it, tells them the dream, and says, can you tell me the interpretation of it? I think it's interesting and also augments the fact that Daniel may be out on foreign intrigue. Like he may be a diplomat and not located in Babylon with the king, because who would the king have gone to if he had a troubling dream and he's available? You tell me he's so narrow-sighted and he's so forgetful that he forgot who told him the last time? It says he put out a decree for all the wise men to come. I think Daniel was probably off somewhere far, because the next statement is, then at last Daniel came. Almost like I was waiting, and then Daniel came. Had he been there, had he been part of the king's inner circle and with him on a daily basis, I don't know that he would have put out a decree to the rest of the wise men, because he goes on to say, I know nothing troubles you. I know no visions. He understands. He's unsure of who to ask. It just says, I asked everyone who was available to tell me, none could tell me, but finally Daniel came. And so I think it augments the fact that Daniel is probably an administrator somewhere else in the kingdom. And when you realize how big the empire, the Babylonian Empire was, it makes sense, given that he had made him second in command. But at last, Daniel came before me. His name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. Wait a second. This is where Nebuchadnezzar changes. What does he start calling him? Daniel. He starts calling him Prince of El, Prince of God. And then he clarifies, because everyone else knows who Belteshazzar is, knows him by his Babylonian name, who is also called the Prince of Bel, right? But he's going to start calling him Daniel. Does this, even in his references to him in the text, he starts referring to him properly. He puts some respect on his name. Whose name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my gods. In him is the spirit of the holy God. And I told the dream before him, saying, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians. That's an interesting statement, and I think I got to resist the urge to dive into it. But if you got into any of the Christmas studies, you know there's a tie here, right? His name is his title is Rav Magah, the head of the Magi. Magician. We get the term magician from the Magi. Well, we also get the term magistrate, which practitioner of the dark arts would be a magician. But in these cultures, those people also held sway. If you had that occultic power, that was a key to rise to power or rise to authority. And the term magistrate becomes one of the magi who was in charge of administration. So we still use those terms today. But here Daniel takes the title of Rav Magah. He's been placed as the head of the magi. And he's going to continue that role. It's going to, as he melds into the Persian Empire, we're going to see Cyrus or Darius give him the exact same title, Rav Magah. And so he's taken on a really interesting role, and it has a lot of significance when you start asking the questions. How did three magi from the Persian Empire know to come to Jerusalem when they saw a star? How did they know they were looking for a prince? How did they know they were looking for one born king of the Jews? They knew all these things that they should not have known. Well, it starts tying together when you think back and realize that 300 years ago, the emperor of that area had placed a Jewish sage as the head of that priestly order, and he probably told them, when you see this, there's your opportunity. It's his way of proselytizing. Because I know the Spirit of the Holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you. Explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation. Again, he's under no delusions here. He knows, he's not asking, is Daniel able, or is Daniel's God able to do this? He knows. And these were the visions of my head while on my bed. So he's going to describe the dream. I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and in it was found food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of heaven dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. Daniel's going to give us a lot of the interpretation, but I wanted to call out, as a study tool, once you've read your Bible enough times and once you get into it, some of these terms are just common. Like, you just hear these terms and you're like, man, I heard that other places and I don't know where. Go ahead and beasts of the field. Just get into any form of, just do a Google search, Bible verse, beasts of the field. You'll find 7 different versions of a commentary that'll pull up each time it's referenced. And you can do your own. You can just read them yourself. You see themes. When it talks about beasts of the field, it's always talking about the pagan world, right? It's always talking about the pagan nations. Like, nations, and they are the beasts. Like the empires, the world governments and such are always the beasts of the field, used consistently, Old Testament through New, 3 different languages it passes through, and we're still using the same term. birds of the air. This says birds of the heaven. That's a poor translation, but birds of the air, we see Jesus using that, right? We see in the parable of the mustard seed that the mustard bush had grown into an abnormally large tree, and the birds of the air came and nested in its branches, and he stops. He expects you to understand that. That's the entire parable. It just said that there's a mustard seed, and it grew to a large bush, and that bush grew abnormally large, and birds of the air came and nested in its branches. You're welcome. Right? What? If you start getting through those idioms, right? This bush, this mustard seed, it's small. It's only supposed to create a plant. It gets abnormal growth. It grows much larger than it should, than in nature. And if you understand that the birds of the air are always significant of evildoers, of the evil ones, they came and nested in its branches. Well, then you go back and see that he's telling parables about the church. The church is going to grow to an abnormal size, and it's going to fill the earth, and the evil ones are going to nest in its branches. It's just a warning. He's giving a warning that this church, this thing, is going to experience so much growth that it's going to adopt worldly things. But you wouldn't get that. There is no possible way you get there unless you read the entire Word of God, and you start seeing, wow, every time it refers to birds of the air, there's something bad. They're up to something bad. And then in two different instances, it says, who are the evil ones? Yep.
In Revelation, whenever it talks about people who are insincere will join you.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, you just have several warnings about, the false shepherds leading people astray, that within the church there's going to be, and the hirelings versus true disciples, those who would fleece the flock. And it really is, I mean, man, without getting too much into this, the worst thing that ever happened to the church was when Constantine adopted it as the mandatory state religion. And that was Satan's strategy was, if you can't beat it through persecution, you beat it through adopting. And it became the accepted mandatory thing. And so now you no longer had to be passionate to join. You no longer had to risk your life to join. You had to become a Christian or you risked your life. And so it just created this whole nominal Christian thing that you were never actually Christ-like. You weren't Christian, you were just by name. And that's populated most of human history. Very few Christians become Christian, and I think that's kind of along the lines of what he's referring to here. But as you see these terms, you can kind of get the connotation that, you've read your Bible so many times that you read these things, and it's almost like you forget, you read right past it, and you say, the pagan nations found shade under it, and the evil ones dwelt in its branches, and you just kind of, that interpretation style sort of sinks in. So there's a tree that's being described that's filled the whole earth, and all of the other nations have found shelter and sustenance from it, including the evil ones, including those who are enemies of God. Yep.
On the slide, what you said was Rob Magah, but on the page here it says Ketum Magah.
I didn't translate. That's Rob Magah is the Hebrew version of it. That's like Rav is like chief or head. Ketum is Aramaic, and so I changed it before I put it out because I didn't know if anyone would. If you Google Ketum Magah, you would see an Aramaic title. I thought if anyone wanted to look it up. Okay. So this continues. So he's still telling his dream to Daniel. I saw in the visions of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one, come down from heaven. And he cried aloud and said thus. I think this statement's interesting, not for what it says here. This title of a watcher in the Aramaic is the same kind of, it's got a same connotation as we use in Hebrew, but it's very clearly an angel. Is their concept of a spirit being. And if you really get into translational issues, you start seeing that same terminology, the same Aramaic word as the Hebrew word, is used for this concept of angels throughout the Bible. The Benayath Elohim is the direct creations of God become these angels or these beings. That same concept is a watcher from the gods. And so you can build out that whole thing, and we've done that in connection with the Genesis 5 and the Nephilim and such. But what's even more interesting to me here is this same king, when he saw a spirit being standing in the midst of the fiery furnace, didn't say, look and behold a watcher. right? He says, there was one like unto the Son of God, right? And whether he knew what he was saying, I do not believe Nebuchadnezzar knew who the Son of God was. I think it's one of those statements just like Caiaphas at the cross. Surely it is better that one dies for the sins of all, or that one dies for the nation. There's prophetic utterances where the individual saying them probably didn't understand the significance of what they were saying, yet it builds to the text. I mean, we know who the Son of God, one like the Son of God is. Do you think Nebuchadnezzar did? He just saw and was overwhelmed, but it's not like that was just the accepted term for these spirit beings. He goes on to call them watchers here. So there's something special about that individual, that being that he saw in the midst of the fiery furnace that led him to call him one like unto the Son of God. And I think that's very interesting. It really reaffirms that there's a type or there's a message behind that story. So the angel cries aloud and says, seeing this tree, chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts get out from under it and the birds from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump and the roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, and the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heavens, and let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. Well, that's interesting. It was just talking about a tree. Just says, hew it down, nevertheless, put the stump and its roots, and then band it with iron, and then it switches. And let him graze. That tree just became a person. Right? There's a definite shift in the focus there. It's talking about you're going to hew down the tree and let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man. All of a sudden, this tree has a heart of a man, and then it's going to be changed, right? There's a broader implication, clearly, and now in this part, it narrows it. It talks from this tree to making it personal and specific. Whoever this tree is, it's a person. It's representative of a person, and the angel tells us that. And let his heart be changed from that of man. Let he be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. 7 times, every Bible help you will ever find will tell you, and probably most of your translations, that times is a reference to a year. So 7 times would be 7 years. It's entirely possible. There's nothing in the context that requires that. There's certainly an Aramaic and a Hebrew word for years. If it wanted to be specific to years, it could have said, let 7 years. But I do not believe there are roundabouts or errors here. I think that it used a very specific word for 7 times. So that could mean it was something less than 7 years. It could have been 7 months, 7 weeks. I don't think that's the case. I think it was 7 years.
It was a perfect amount of time.
It was a complete, certainly 7 has significance. Whatever it was the amount of time that was necessary to accomplish God's end. And that's what 7 signifies. So then what does it matter whether it's time, whether times is a year or months? It doesn't. That's completely irrelevant. It was that amount of time for completion of God's thing. What I think is really incredible is Daniel's going to switch back to Hebrew by the time we get to chapter 9, and he's going to start talking about things in time, times, and a half a time. And that's the only other part you're going to start hearing that term in the entire Bible, to refer to a period of time. Maybe that should clue us to link those two together, right? He referred Nebuchadnezzar, and it says it 4 different times, that this will pass over you for 7 times. And the only other reference to times is a very clear reference to years, talking about the Antichrist, that says that he will go for time, times, and a half a time. So 3.5 times, 3.5 years. The reason we know that one is years is because in Revelation, it's going to tell us it's 1,420. He'll be given power for 1,420 days. And then we're going to hear in Isaiah that it's in weeks. So we have it in everything but minutes. And we know that that one's very specifically years. Good.
Well, there's hours.
Yeah, sure.
I'm thinking of the verse, there's a time and a season for every purpose.
Under heaven.
Under the seventh sun, or that, what is it?
Under heaven, yep.
Yeah, and so, if times has to do with God's purpose, as you were talking about, that's an interesting dimension.
And right, and there's so much interplay with that verse, and for day and for night, there's a whole prophetic inference of the day being a time and the night being a time. So the Hebrew day is, in context within the Levitical order, it's divided into 2 times. But it's 2 periods. It's not 2 times as in chronology. The word that's used is times as in exactly that, a season. In this one instance, and in Daniel, the word is chrono. It's the chrono is the time. And so in the Septuagint, they translate that one differently than any other times or seasons, which is strange. But I can only think that this is a clear allusion to look to that other spot, right? I mean, it's a common phrase, and it's not the same person even using it. So the angel explains the reason this has to happen. This decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets over it the lowest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now you, Belteshazzar, declare its interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able. And he got the message the first time. Daniel was very careful to say no. Nebuchadnezzar said, can you tell me my dream? And he says, no, king, I cannot, but my God can, and my God is able. And he kind of gives this statement on the power of God. Nebuchadnezzar got that now, right? At this point, he understands what's going on. My advisors didn't have the power in them, but you are able, for the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. So just because this is kind of the last of them, one of the reasons I believe this is historically authentic is this. If you've read historical texts at all, this has that ring of historical accuracy. You will never find a writing by anyone, regardless of culture, in the ancient times that isn't portraying them as knowing the solution and all-knowing, even if they're asking for help, like in this case. Nebuchadnezzar is saying, I knew that if I went to you, that you would, and I knew, and if only you. It's even in this, Nebuchadnezzar's praising himself, right? He found the solution. That, I absolutely knew that you had the Spirit of the Holy God. Before I even needed to ask, I knew that you would have the interpretation thereof, right? There's this element of always like self-aggrandizing that it is so common through historical text. And you read it here and it's like, yeah, that sounds exactly like, and it's so contrary to the way the rest of the Bible's written. Even here, he's saying, I knew that this, even before you just proved it to me, even though I didn't listen to you and didn't do the thing you tell me to do, I clearly knew that the Spirit of the Most High God reigned in the world, and that you had the answers here. It's very self-aggrandizing, even though he's telling his story. And to me, that is the ultimate mark of authenticity in historical writings, up until like almost the Victorian era, when humility became like a Catholic virtue. So here we go. So then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished for a time. He was troubled for a time, and his thoughts troubled him. I actually used the same word twice. So the king spoke and said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation trouble you. And Belteshazzar answered the king and said, my lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. He's saying, I wish this dream had been to one of your enemies. I wish this hadn't been you. If it had been one of your, may this happen to someone else but you. So he may have some affection here. He didn't say that kind of thing the first time. He was bold, and here he's saying it troubled him. He was worried about what I think to be his friend. May this be to anyone else but you. The tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens, and which could be seen by all the earth, whose leaves were lovely and its fruit abundant, in which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and the branches of the birds in the heaven had their home. It is you, O king. You have grown and become strong, for your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. And inasmuch as the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump and its root in the earth bound with a band of iron and bronze, and the tender grass in the field, let it be wet with dew of the heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the field till 7 times pass over it. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. They shall drive you from men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. So one important grammatical note, when he keeps saying they shall drive you, they shall wet you, he's referring to these watchers. That's a reference back to what he just said, the watchers decree. So the angels, what he's saying is that by decree of the Most High God, these heavenly ones will cause you to do these things, to a period of insanity. And so it is clearly a judgment from God. You can't spin it some creative way and say, well, this is something that it was a plot of the people that went to overthrow him to try to make him seem crazy, and they forced him out. It's making very clear this is from on high. This is a judgment. And some people will try to explain it away as like, well, there was a coup, and they just made it seem like that's what was happening so that they could push him out. And there was nothing mystical or crazy about this, but it was their attempt to overthrow him, and that God would allow it. But no, it's not what it says. It very clearly says this is happening from on high, that it would send him into this period. And inasmuch as they gave the command to leave the stump and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be assured to you. After you come to know that the God of heaven rules, therefore, O king, let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. Lots to kind of digest there, but it's a very line-by-line interpretation of what he saw. What I think is interesting is somehow, and I can't fathom how you extrapolate this, you will see sermons and entire books written on Daniel saying that a recipe for forestalling judgment is doing these things, right? That, these are giving to the poor is how you will forestall God's judgment, and even using that as the church can delay the tribulation, the wrath of God, all these things by following Daniel's recipe. And I'm serious, there are entire books written on this last sentence that Daniel has prescribed the method by which we can satiate God. As if we need to satiate God. Like as if he's, still wrathful. You satiate God by believing in the one that sent him and giving him the excuse to save you that he so desperately wants. That's all. The rest of it's meaningless and nonsense. That's like your service to him. Daniel is saying here, maybe, certainly what you're doing isn't working. You just got a judgment pronounced upon you. Maybe you can forestall judgment by changing your ways. Serve God, repent, and maybe God will change his mind. He is not prescribing the method by which he's telling Nebuchadnezzar, you will certainly forestall judgment. And he's definitely not telling you that by doing these things that God will no longer allow judgments or reprove your sins if you do these things. Do away with...
Telling him to humble himself before God so God doesn't have to humble him.
That's absolutely right. And maybe, and it's all in questions. It's and maybe God will change his mind. He's gotten a prophecy. I think Daniel knows it's coming, but he wants this not to happen very clearly. So he's begging the king, change your ways, and maybe God will.
Do you see Revelation in this chapter too?
Not for 3 slides. Not for at least 3 slides. Yeah, no, I'm joking. I think that's kind of where I'm driving here.
Absolutely.
That's my
So much of it.
my view in all of this is, yes, take the lessons of word for word, read everything word for word, but also know that these stories were passed down for over 2,000 years. Some of them, not necessarily this one, before written record, right? The stories of Genesis were told, mother to son for 50 generations, maybe 50 generations. And so a lot of these stories are meant to convey I heard this. He was in the role of, I've seen this before. And so you should be hearing these stories as in God is communicating a truth, or all of it is prophetic. It points to Christ somehow, something that's in his plan. And if you were to somehow understand all of it, even without Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, you would know the plan of Christ, the redemptive plan of Christ. It's all in the Old Testament. He flat tells us that. Should I do nothing? There's nothing that I will do that I haven't told to my friend the prophets. Everything has been revealed. It's none of it is new in the New Testament. It is a revelation of things that were foretold. It's all there. It's all been told. And so if you can find him in the midst of it, and so a lot of times you just kind of have to almost get out of the weeds, take another look at it and say, who's in the role of? What is it showing me? And now as a New Testament Christian with the benefit of 4,000 years of hindsight, you can see a lot of it's already come to pass, and you can see very clear things on the horizon. So all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, so a year later, I was walking upon the royal palace of Babylon. So he's up in the parapets looking out at all of Babylon, and the king spoke, saying, is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? Right? These are the I will statements of Nebuchadnezzar. If you're familiar with the I will statements of Satan, I will make myself like, I will ascend to I will make myself like in the Most High. All of these pride statements should really sound familiar. While the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, that shall make you eat grass like an oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives to whomever he chooses. That very hour the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and ate grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird claws. And I had to go back to the old King James just for his prayer here. And so he states his condition. He was in this condition, and we're going to talk about that the next slide. Tells what happens to him, and he jumps. Doesn't give a whole ton of detail of what that was like, but he jumps straight to the end. And I love his prayer, and you really can't beat the King James. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High. And I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion. That should be familiar to us. And his kingdom is from generation to generation. Those are quoting the words of Christ, saying, all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of the heavens and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what doest thou? I like that ending. No one can say to him, what doest thou? Who can question him? He does what he will. He has power in heaven and on earth, and who can even question him? Not to mention the spirit of it is no one can defy him. You can't even question him. And this is coming from a guy who about 2 chapters ago was murdering people for not worshiping him, and then went to the servants of that same God and says, who and what God then can deliver you out of my hands, right? Talk about a change of heart. Like, that is the same guy within about a 10-year stretch, and the fly is back. At that same time, my reason returned unto me. For the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and my brightness returned unto me, and my counselors, my Lord, sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added even unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. I will note 2 things here. All the tense of this is now first person, singular and specific. It is a perfect tense. It's continuing. I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and honor him. It's not like he said before, and he fell before and worshipped him, right? It's not a singular and specific act. He is saying I, in the perfect sense, praise and extol and honor. And then you have this term, the King of heaven. No other Jewish prophet has used that one yet. We got something new, right? You have a heathen king who just referred to the King of Heaven. How do you have a King of Heaven without, I mean, you get into some really revelation concepts that we can't really go through here, but it leads to this idea of the Trinity, that there is not just a God in the heavens, that there is at least a duality of God, and that leads to some interesting insights, but I think it's really wild that the first person to utter this statement that's going to be used all throughout the New Testament is Nebuchadnezzar. And it's that Paul's going to pick up on the King of Heaven and the kingdom of heaven and that concept all throughout. Yep.
It said, so after Daniel interpreted the dream, a year went by. What has happened?
Yep.
So do you think when Daniel said, maybe if you
He thought,
humble yourself, maybe God gave him that year to change? Or
it's possible. I think it's possible that God delayed judgment. We've seen that before. We've seen that, when Josiah that goes and falls before the altar and God prolongs his years, had a judgment had been given to him, and then because he repented, God gave him more time. It turned out to be the worst mistake possible because that was that's the period of time that crumpled the kingdom. And it goes to show that God's ways are better. But I think it probably is something along the lines of he thought he had satiated it. Or, I mean, it just kind of seems consistent with his personality, though. Like he's like David. He's very passionate. He goes just to extremes one way or the other. Like Nebuchadnezzar and David are incredible parallels. Just 1 minute very passionately worshiping and making these profound prophetic statements and recognizing as a pagan that Daniel's God is the most high God. And the next minute, going back to his evil ways. And, you see this parallel of Nebuchadnezzar's heart and David's. And so, I think, it just fell away, just slipped away. And he feared God for a while. And he probably thought he had satisfied him and then found himself full of pride again. And you'll find as a theme throughout the Bible, I didn't get into it because it's a whole study in itself, God hates pride. Above all things, you will find that God hates pride. He says, 6 things have I loathed, the 7, and goes through, and 4 of the things are a lofty heart, or are essence elements of pride. And ultimately, pride is what caused the fall of Satan, what caused the rebellion of man. It's the fundamental root of all sin, and God hates pride. And so that is a theme that's cover to cover of all the sins. You almost find he has a loving softness for sin, that he knows the struggle and he knows your heart and he wants you to come back to, and he doesn't necessarily have the harshest words to say about murder, right? Listen to with David. Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands, and God almost kind of, you don't see the harsh statements. Let's just leave it at that. You don't see the harsh statements about murder, but when it comes to pride, it is always, he hates pride. That is something. God hates all sin, but for some reason goes out of his way to warn us over and over and over that pride cometh before the fall, that it is the root of all sin. Yeah, exactly, because pride is the thing that prevents you from coming to him. Pride is the thing that keeps you from falling on your face and saying, I am in need of salvation.
that's exactly what I believe. I think it stems from Genesis 6.
Absolutely. Yep. The fall is, I can do it without you. It's, you've made a way, but I can do it otherwise. That's the root of all pride.
He also told him to show mercy to the poor.
Daniel,
There was an action in there.
And-
That maybe if he showed mercy to the poor, there would be a link to his prosperity.
yeah, and I think that's Daniel's plea. Do the things that I know God loves. Those are the things that he loves, and he says that when he's talking to the Jews before the destruction of the southern kingdom. He says, yes, sacrifices and obeisances I have no need for. What I want is right justice, mercy to the poor, love. Right, these things are things that God loves, and Daniel's saying, don't do that thing that I know he hates. Do the thing I know he loves, and maybe you can change his mind. And certainly that giving to the poor and showing mercy is at the heart of God. So this has received a lot of attack. Like, the Bible is nonsense. There's no record of Nebuchadnezzar having a 7-year period of insanity. The first thing I'll tell you is records of this time are fragments. There is not a biography of Nebuchadnezzar around. You will not go pick up his autobiography or something that was written about him. You find fragments of things written on a cylinder, engraved in a stone, and it's an individual snapshot of his life. Nebuchadnezzar lived close to 65 years. There are absolutely long periods of his reign some are up to 20 years that are undocumented of anything that happened during that time. So anyone that tells you, well, there's no room in the record of Nebuchadnezzar for a 7-year period of insanity is absolutely out of their mind. We maybe have 25 or 30 different singular sources of information that are specific to the life and conquest of this man. Not talking about like the Battle of Carchemish, which is well documented, huge battle between Egypt and Babylon, tons of writing on that. But just the fact that he participated in it comes from a fragment, a cylinder, so very limited.
Well, and plus, would they have recorded things like
The
that?
Chronicles
They
of the
bragged.
Kings.
When I say that it has the ring of history, the things that got written down, would you ever write something that paints the king in a bad light? No. But even when the king writes of his humility, he can't help it but make himself the hero of that story. But I knew that Daniel would. And that's why I say it has the ring of historicity, if you will.
You say you lived 65 years. Your timeline, it looks more like 80.
No, you're right. He reigned 65 years. He reigned 65 years. Yep. No, you're absolutely right. Because he was...
So we're not counting the 7th time.
Yeah, that got carved out. No, I think that's right. I think he was like close to 20 when Nebuchadnezzar died, because that was literally within a year of the Battle of Carchemish. He was in the midst of laying siege to Jerusalem the first time, gets news that Nebuchadnezzar dies, leaves the siege, and goes back to assume the throne. Go ahead. You were trying to add something there.
Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar made his own record, and it's not being acknowledged as a valid record, just as the Bible is not acknowledged as a valid record.
Yep.
I've been reading books by a Jewish man who so much wanted the Jewish Bible, Old Testament, to be taught in the universities, just like Socrates and what all. And he said they talked about gods and goddesses and nymphs, etc. And yet they're acclaimed as so wise. So, why can't the Hebrew scriptures be considered?
Socrates wrote at the exact same time. He wrote around 300 BC. That's the same time some of these things were being recorded. You will never find a writing to say Socrates didn't say that. That wasn't actually Socrates' writing. That was a compilation of several different people who wrote it. Yet we have the same type. We have a way better record of the scripture than we do of anything that guy ever wrote. You can go through the list of Aristotle, Plato. They're all the Greek were during these so-called silent years. Hey, we're talking right around the same time that you will never find anyone seeking to challenge. Was that really Plato that said that? No, I don't think so, because there's a tick in this fragment that's chiseled in stone from 2,700 years ago that actually looks a lot more like a comma than it is a period. And so it's actually probably Plata, which was a distant cousin of, which is the crap they do to discredit the Bible. And we're about to have one of the best examples you'll ever find of that one here. First of all, for a long time, it was, that's just weird. That's not something. I will tell you, there is a huge medical record. It's a term for it is called zoanthropy. And there is in most cultures, most ancient cultures, and even modern cultures, a derangement of the mind or a mental disability where a person thinks themselves to be an animal and behaves as an animal. Fortunately, we don't have any in our modern enlightened society. Fortunately, we don't have to deal with that anymore. No, yeah, but that's what I'm. So crazy to think that might have happened back then. We would never deal with that today, right? No, it's a very legitimate thing. This entire concept of werewolves And that's called lycanthropy. That's these terms are anthropy being of man, zoo being zoology, animals. Lycanthropy is a dog man. There are so many thousands of records throughout history of people who believed that they were, that become a dog and would attack people in villages, had to be like put down. It's still happening all the time today. It's a mental derangement that comes about. The term that's closer to Nebuchadnezzar is boanthropy. There are people who have delusions that they are an ox, they are a cow, and want to eat green. And this is not undocumented. There are many, many medical cases. That quote is from, or the description is from the dictionary. I'll just read an abstract from the American Journal of Medicine on what is zoanthropy. It's a clinical zoanthropy, or the conviction of having turned into an animal, is a rare delusion. There are different views about its pathogenesis. The delusion can occur with an underlying psychiatric disorder. Anyway, I won't go. It is a known medical phenomenon that we still deal with today, and there are. It's not so outlandish that someone would go through a period of mental derangement where they believe themselves an animal. It is so well documented through history of having cases where people have gone through this, to the point of being literally deranged. I can't tell you from personal experience that all of these lycanthropy, all these like werewolf stories, a lot of it has ties with myths and legend. I can tell you that when I worked as a prison guard at a maximum security prison, the day shift got paid time and a half to come in and stay nights on days the moon was full. Like, I will tell you the weirdest, Mariah worked at, everyone that's ever worked at a prison knows prisoners go bananas on full moons. In mental health in general, the term for lunatics, what is luna? Luna is of the moon. It means moon sickness, moon madness. Is even back to like Greek philosophy, they understood that something happens in the mind as a result of the moon being full. And we see crime rates triple on full moons. Like, there is something of a madness. So when you say that there might be a disease, a mental derangement like lycanthropy, that some people are triggered by a full moon, having worked at a prison, I 100% believe there. Do I think they grow fur and their nails shoot out of their hands? Absolutely not. But I do think there are people that have mental sicknesses that are triggered by lunar cycles. And just because I have seen some weird stuff that way. Yep.
Okay, but we could possibly say that from Nebuchadnezzar's life, it doesn't have to be permanent,
No.
but it's actually a spiritual matter.
It-
But he said his understanding returned to him. Now that's not, well, that could be spiritual understanding, that God.
No, I think he might have legitimate. I mean, I think this. I don't mean to say it couldn't have been supernatural, but anyone who attacks this and says this is weird doesn't know history. People have been afflicted with this mental disorder, and it could be something as simple as having been exposed to rust and having tetanus. There are people who have contracted rabies and started having lady thought she was a chicken because it turns out she got rabies. And she legitimately, I read the rest of this abstract. It's a story about this is a fairly recent story of a woman who they did a whole bunch of analysis and turned out God could use natural means to bring about this temporary period and cure it. Who cares what he used? He is God. He can do what he wants. But to anyone who attacks this to say that's abnormal is not a student of history. There are so many every culture has concepts of people who believe themselves to be dogs or something where they've lost their rationale and have lost the ability to function. So, I mean, there's an element of this that's like, it's not that far-fetched. And even undocumented, it's like, okay, he went through a period of mental derangement and he understood that was a judgment. Sure. I could see it. Depression, maybe you went through a period where as judgment for your sin, you experienced deep, dark depression. God allows it to happen.
When we consider something miraculous or a miracle, it can be something supernatural or it can be something totally natural under supernatural conditions.
Absolutely. That's why I just say, who cares? I don't care whether the long night of Joshua was because of Mars interacting, like Velikovsky says there's a period where Mars interacted with the Earth and pulled the Earth out of its orbit, causing a long day of Joshua. Sweet. I know it happened. The fact that God could do something like that could set something in orbit hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years or whatever before so that it happened at the same time only makes him more incredible.
Well, Hezekiah's shadow moving backwards.
Backward.
18 degrees.
Yeah, there's just all exactly. There's all of these. Yes, you can, if you explain them by natural phenomenon, you only make me worship all the more because you have a God who set these things in motion how long in advance? Or there's a God who legitimately controls nature? You think that warns me away from him? You're kidding.
Not prove that it was not God.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, you show me that it happened by natural phenomenon, I say, wow, God controls nature. Great. That's even more incredible. And so anyway, I say that part of, a lot of it is attacked on those grounds. But then, once again, to our rescue is the caves in the Qumran caves and the fragments that are found there. They're just hundreds of thousands of records, including complete copies of books of the Bible that were absolutely, irrefutably dated back to around 200 or 300 BC. And among them, we find this single scroll, a fragment that is labeled the Prayer of Nabonidus. Okay, Nabonidus is the son, or the second son of Nebuchadnezzar. He will become the king after Evil-Merodach. He's Belteshazzar's father, a guy named Nabonidus. And so everyone knows that's in the reign of of Nebuchadnezzar. That's in the line of Nebuchadnezzar. And this fragment purports to be from this time period. And it reads, the words of the prayer of Nabonidus, the king of Assyria and Babylon, the great king, prayed when he was smitten with a malignant disease by the decree of the Most High God in the city of Tema, which is the region around Babylon. I was smitten for 7 years from men, and I was put away. But when I confessed my sins and my faults, he, God, allowed me to have a soothsayer. This was a man of the exiles of Babylon, and he explained to me and wrote me to render honor and great glory to the name of the Most High God. You read that, and you're telling, you are absolutely insane if the first thing that doesn't come to your mind is the story in Daniel 5 is vindicated, right? How do you read that account after years of saying this never happened and not say, oh my gosh, that is absolute proof of the truth of the story in Daniel 5? You know how they do it? They say that's the prayer of Nabonidus, not Nebuchadnezzar. The Bible is wrong. It doesn't even know what it's talking about. It attributes this whole thing to Nebuchadnezzar, but this scroll, this proves the Bible is wrong. It's Nabonidus. It says Nabonidus, and the Bible says Nebuchadnezzar. Here is the name Nabonidus in Aramaic. Here is the name Nebuchadnezzar in Aramaic. They are both Nabonidus, Nebuchadnezzar, Nabu-N, Nabu-K, right? And so Knezer is the servant of Nabu, and Nidus is the chosen of Nabu. But you're telling me in the scroll, in the fragment you see behind me, that you can distinguish those two single letters with absolute certainty to know that is definitive proof that the Bible is false, despite the fact that the entire rest of the fragment goes on to validate something that was written and verified over and over and over and over. People are insane. Like, they will do anything and bend over backwards to find a reason to not any other text in the world that we thought, I wonder if that's true. If this had been the Trojan horse, right? We all think, well, did that actually happen? If you found this fragment that says, I was there and there was a golden horse and it came in, but it was in the city of Trey, right? We would be like, oh, absolutely. That's the Trojan horse, vindicated, right on. But, because it's the Bible, we're saying, no, this says Trey, not Troy, so it's probably something entirely different, right? Entirely. It can't be the same. That is the mental exercises people go through, and to me, you want to talk about an insanity definition, that blows my mind. And to hear people like scholars write articles on why that is, without a doubt, Nabonidus. And we're going to, I got a couple minutes. One of the best examples, one of my favorite examples we're going to encounter next week. The Bible attributes the fall of Babylon to Belteshazzar being the king of Babylon. And for over 500 years, people have ridiculed the Bible and said, no, we've got records of the Babylonian lineage. Nabonidus was king when when the Persians conquered Babylon. Nabonidus is the third son of Nebuchadnezzar. He was king. Here's everything. And it was this big laughing stock. They found an entire record that Nabonidus was run out of Babylon because he was a worshiper of the sun god and not of Marduk, and he tried to change the priesthood. So the priests of Babylon forced him into exile, and so he self-exiled somewhere in the north and left and took on, even talks about the wife he took on, and he left his son Belteshazzar to reign as regent in the area. And then you start wondering, why did Belteshazzar, when he promised Daniel, he says, if you can tell me what this writing on the wall is, I will make you the third ruler in the kingdom. It validates, that is an eyewitness account. He told you there were, the text tells you exactly what really happened. And for all that time, they mocked the Bible, saying there's no record of Belteshazzar ruling. That was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. The king was still alive. And you find vindication. It legitimately, now you won't find, even Wikipedia will tell you that, Belteshazzar was placed as a regent while Nebuchadnezzar was off on foreign intrigues. And nobody has the intellectual honesty or courage to just come out and say, hey, maybe they're onto something. Maybe this is true. Maybe this was an eyewitness account. They just kind of, when it's proven right, just shift past it. And when they have an opportunity to attack it, just focus all guns blazing.
Third, who's number two?
Belteshazzar. So Belteshazzar,
Oh, I see. Never mind.
his promise to Daniel, he couldn't make him number two in the kingdom like Nebuchadnezzar did, like Darius will do. He says, I will make you the third ruler of the kingdom, because he's already the second. He's a regent. There's also another one that's really interesting, and I didn't put it in here, but it's the account of Evil Merodach. So that's the son of Nebuchadnezzar. And there's another record of him petitioning before the magistrates, the magi, to ignore the lawful orders of the king. And there's not enough of the fragment to know what he's talking about, but it's this petition of Evil Merodach to grant him authority to rule even though the king is still alive, and to ignore the orders of the king. It doesn't say what's going on, but if maybe you had a period of madness, he's not saying, he's recognizing that the king is still alive and keeps referring to him as the king, but he's trying to petition the magistrate to ignore orders of the king and to allow him to rule in his stead. That only makes sense if the king has gone through some sort of period of madness. And so that's another interesting validation. And so I think there is plenty of record out there that this thing may have happened, if you happen to need that. But let's go just our next level down. Let's just take this back, and from a Jewish mindset, prophecy is pattern. It's more, he's playing the role of, where have I seen this before? Oh, this person's in the role of that, and he's acting out something that will happen in advance. And we went through that quite in a lot of detail last week in some of the most more prominent examples, but I think the lion's den and the fiery furnace are actually very, very strong examples. So when you look at chapter 4 and the king's testimony, go back to chapter 3, just hearken back. What role did Nebuchadnezzar play in the type in chapter 3? It was to cast the Jews into the fiery furnace. He's cast in the role of the Antichrist, right? Of someone who was going to persecute the Jews, and they would be preserved through the fiery furnace. And so he was in that role before. Maybe we use that possibly as a starting point, but just go through and get the details out and tell the story. A world ruler establishes peace and prosperity. The ruler is overcome by pride at what he's accomplished. He stands and makes boastful statements in defiance of God. Then he's overcome with madness. The madness renders him a beast of the field. The king's period of madness lasts for 7 years. As a result, God is glorified throughout the known worlds, and the purpose is specifically stated as judgment of his sin and the glory of God. Just saying it on that level makes you can start already putting the puzzle together. This isn't deep theology. Once again, it's pretty basic. It's storytelling. It's how do I convey the message of redemption in a way that means something to the people, that can be passed down generation from generation? I tell stories so that you can say, oh, I've seen this before. I've heard that story. This is the Antichrist established a period of global peace and prosperity as its rise to world dominance. Thessalonians describes him as the man of lawlessness who opposes and exalts himself over everything considered divine worship. Over 25 times he's seen boast. Each time we just see him described, for some reason, it always makes clear that he's boasting in pride. Revelation 13:5, he was given a mouth to speak great boastful things and great blasphemies. And then in Revelation 13, we know that Satan came over him, gave him his power, and indwelt him. He becomes this third member of this satanic trinity. And so most people, myself included, believe he is a prominent world leader, believe he may have risen on good intent. He may have had a purpose that wasn't satanic, but then somehow he is overcome by Satan, or he gives himself to Satan, and then it initiates this 7-year period of, I haven't gotten there yet. He's referred to throughout as the great and terrible beast, the beast of the sea. He's, in fact, the most common term for the Antichrist is the beast during this 7-year period. The Antichrist dominion lasts 7 years, the last 3.5 of which are the tribulation. And then Jesus' account of what will happen at the end times, he tells us the result of. The one thing you always have to keep in mind is, who is the author of the Great Tribulation? Is it the Antichrist? Is it Satan? It is the period of the wrath of Jesus Christ. It is called the wrath of the Lamb. This is a period of God's judgment to an unbelieving world. He is the author. He has a purpose in allowing it. Yes, Satan does those things, but your view of God is not big enough if you don't understand that he is the author of all that calamity that will happen during that time. He is going to allow the Antichrist to rise. He's going to allow the Antichrist to martyr millions of his saints. There's a purpose to all of it, and Jesus tells us that purpose is in the same discourse, and the disciples come to him and say, tell us what things shall be, and what shall be sign of thy coming and of the world's end. And Jesus answered and said to them, and he goes on, do not be deceived. You will hear wars, you'll hear hurricanes and earthquakes in diverse places. You'll hear wars and rumors of wars, but don't be deceived. Those are not signs. The sign will be, as Noah. And then he concludes with, but he that shall endure until the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all the nations, and shall come, and then shall the end come. The purpose of all of it is a culmination of righteousness, is a final preaching of the gospel to all the world. And Daniel, in chapter Daniel 9, he states the very purpose of the tribulation, and he lays it out in a systematic order: to finish the transgression, to put an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity. And those are 3 different things, but they have commonalities. To bring in everlasting righteousness, to cause righteousness, to confirm the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Those are all things that came about as a result of this in Nebuchadnezzar's life, right? It was a conviction of sin. It was a purging of his iniquity. It was it brought about the fulfillment of prophecy and a vision. And it ushers in this change in Nebuchadnezzar, and most importantly, the result is that the Holy One, the God, is exalted. The parallels are too much to ignore. It may not be all there is to take away from this, and I will never argue that there's no spiritual purpose, and the Holy Spirit doesn't use this for 1,000 different purposes in 1,000 people's lives. But when you ask, how does this story point to Christ? When Jesus says, the volume of the book, it is written of me. This is a clear part of his prophetic plan, of his second coming, of this thing that is going to come about on the earth. And that's the heart of all prophecy, is whether it's his first coming, his second coming, his satisfaction of our debt, all aspects of his mission. The heart of prophecy is telling that story. And there is nothing new in the New Testament. It's all been told, whether by story, whether by model. It's all there to be found. And no one will ever convince me that this is just a coincidence, that these attributes of Nebuchadnezzar's madness and the time and the results and the what brought it about, and those are all just, it's just a coincidence that happens to be the entire rise of the Antichrist and the purpose of his destruction and how God brings that about. There's a message. There's a message in a story system where God is just validating that he declares the end from the beginning. All of it is prophetic. There's no aspect of this that isn't prophecy. So that concludes chapter 4, the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar. Next week, we are going to do the last of the historical books, and that's covering the fall of Babylon. Most of us know the handwriting on the wall, the story of Daniel's interpretation. We'll cover that. The real heart of that story, the creepy writing on the wall has significance. The real heart of that story is the fall of Babylon. I mean, there's so much to be learned there, and it has such significance. I put it on here. If you want to, or if you can, prepare for next week, read Isaiah 13 and 14, and read Jeremiah 50 and 51. Not study like we do, not like verse by verse try to dissect it. Just read those and get a flavor of what it's talking about. Those are going to be prophetic, dealing with the destruction of Babylon. There is a destruction of Babylon in sight that is absolutely detailed throughout Scripture, that is God's judgment against the city of Babylon, the pride of the Chaldean excellency, various, and get a sense for what's it talking about, just in your mind, because we won't have time to obviously go through all 4 of those chapters, but it really does the exercise of asking, was this conquest of Babylon by Cyrus, where the river was diverted and his armies snuck under the wall, and the city of Babylon, the inhabitants, some of which didn't even know they'd been conquered for 5 days, is that what's being described in Isaiah and Jeremiah? Is that what happened? I'm going to forecast a little bit that Alexander the Great made it the capital of his world empire. The Persians established a nation head. Peter is the head of the church in Babylon by the time the Romans come about. So maybe it wasn't destroyed suddenly and catastrophically. Maybe there's something else in view. And if so, what is that, right? And they're going to kind of wrestle with that. Most scholars, most Bible commentaries, probably every one of your translations, when we get into Revelation and Isaiah, when it talks about the fall of Babylon or the doom of Babylon, the destruction of Babylon, will say this is a reference to the events of Daniel 5. And I ask you to read those and see, does that sound like what happened there? And if not, maybe there's something else in sight. So, okay, I will stop the recording.